Hello everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith and I'm excited today to be talking about the story narrative in between Scenario 1 and going into Scenario 2, as well as Scenario 2's setup. Plus, we're going to talk about some of the specifics with the two-player variant and how they're different and handled differently than when you're controlling 4 players in a scenario all at the same time when you're playing solo. Instead here, we've been playing with 2 characters and bringing 2 characters into each scenario, although we've only done 1 so far, but we'll be moving into our second one shortly. And I wanted to talk about those differences right now because it's a good time to bring that up, being that we're out of a scenario and kind of in between scenarios. So currently, the biggest thing to remember, guys, when you're going through these this two-player variant is that your pack size, which is not what's equipped on your character. A pack size is essentially your availability to hold other items outside of what you have equipped, is actually increased to 5 per character when playing the two-player variant. And again, that's just offsetting the fact you're not controlling 4 characters with full loadouts. So they're allowing you to have some extra pack size to basically carry more gear. So be aware of that. You have more space to carry things, always a good thing to know. Secondly, another difference with the two-player variant is exchanging items. So normally you can't exchange items between party members outside of encounters, but now when you're playing the two-player variant, you're allowed to do that. So I could start moving some of these consumables that make more sense to be on Rook versus Remy and bounce them back and forth without any kind of stoppage there in the rulebook. So that's one of the adjusted rules for the two-player variant, basically meaning that you will only ever need to buy items for 2 adventures throughout the entire game, though you may want to have some different types of equipment available to accommodate for different discipline loadouts. So what it's essentially saying is you want to focus on the fact that you might need some items that basically focus on the loadouts of the linked characters, so that if you do decide to use one of those linked characters, that you're able to swap one in and out, because you still have access to those linked characters. So you kind of want to be able to, you're basically, your loadouts will be less confusing because you're not having to manage 4 of them at once. But when you purchase something, it has more meaning because you're essentially purchasing it likely for the character you're putting it or equipping it on, but also potentially maybe giving to another character to switch out at some point later on. And that's kind of one of the cool things with the two-player variant, is allowing you that freedom to move that stuff around and exchanging items. So the other thing to mention is discipline loadouts. So even though you're only playing 2 adventures, it's very possible that during an encounter you'll be forced to play a specific adventure due to a thematic story event. So in other words, there might be a thematic event that says, if you have the discipline like Remy does here, that actually indicates martial, you're not allowed to actually use that discipline going into the next scenario for whatever thematic reason. If that's the case, you would then have to bring somebody like Nightingale in, and in this case you'd be taking Nightingale's character card and basically reversing things. Nightingale would be the character you bring in, and Remy might be the linked character in that case, because you're not allowed to actually bring that character in. So just be aware of that. If that happens, that's how you handle those situations. Another thing to be aware of is skill checks. So when a skill check requires all 4 adventurers to participate, and you're only doing the two-player variant where you're controlling 2 characters at once in a scenario, just go ahead and grab the actual character cards for the 2 linked characters that you've chosen, and you can reference those in order to make the skill checks. You still do the skill checks anyway, even though you're only controlling 2 characters. Nothing really changes there. Reduced gold is another thing that changes with the two-player variant, and you might be wondering, well, what does that mean? Well, due to how items are more readily accessible, the amount of gold earned throughout the game is significantly reduced. So if you're playing a crawl scenario setup, gold's reduced by half if you're actually doing the crawl, which we're not currently doing right now if you're using the two-player variant. Anytime in the adventure mechanic where you get a loot token, special encounter rule applies, or ability that would give players gold, they only gain half the amount. So you got to remember that it's always half. Loot tokens that can be activated by multiple adventures give the full amount of gold, since they can only be activated by 2 adventures maximum. So there will be certain times where it'll ask that 2 adventures, I guess, need to interact with something in order to gain it. But because you're still controlling 2 adventures, you can gain the full amount in those specific scenarios because you still use 2 to gain that. There's also a bullet here that says, when calculating the amount of gold gained by the combatant loot cards at the end of an encounter, you only gain half the amount listed on each card. The most efficient way to do this is to half the total gold gained in this way at the end of each encounter to avoid bogging down gameplay. So again, we're in a different situation here because we're at the very beginning of the game. We've already gained some gold. Remy was able to gather 9 gold, and we were able to get 5 and 6 for Rook, but we know that currently the shop and train section of the game is not coming up until the Mast scenario or sessions have been completed, as I mentioned earlier. So really the gold tallying doesn't really need to happen yet, but we do need to make mention of the gold that we do have here. So we're going to go ahead and note the gold that we currently have on us, because we can't lose gold unless of course something in the book specifies that at some point. But currently right now we have this gold, and we just have to half it basically in half, and then we can continue on. And later on down the line, once we do a couple of these sessions in a row, we're going to be able to tally up how much gold we have total, and then we'll be able to have a chance to actually spend that gold. So that's kind of where there might be some confusion. I want to make 100% certain you guys are aware of the fact that there is no shop and train between the first encounter of the Mast and the second scenario. We don't get to go buy anything. We're still currently progressing through the trial. Another thing to note is whenever a new adventurer joins the party, the gold gained is cut in half. That's something else to mention. And selling items during a story round still gives you the full amount of gold. So if you're going to sell an item, certain cards, like for instance, if you wanted to sell a particular consumable or something, it still gives you the full amount of gold that specifies itself on the card. And that actually covers it. There's really only two other sections that you can find within that document on the Succubus Publishing site, and that pertains to discipline changes. So certain disciplines have some adjustments to the wording or the usage of particular cards. We haven't seen them all yet, but basically there's decks for each of the disciplines, and I believe there's maybe 3 cards that get an adjustment in terms of what their abilities are, and of course really won't come into play until you eventually accumulate that specific discipline ability. So in that particular case, you can kind of wait until you obtain it to reference the 2-player variant rule sheet that's on the Succubus Publishing site. The other section, which is a major section, is encounter changes, and you'll want to reference this. There's about 10 or so basically throughout the book where the encounter may change in different ways, whether it be like the starting zone, it might have to do with a particular character or how a particular scenario is played out. So there are a couple rules adjustments, but honestly, it's less than half a page of differences. So really, again, this is why I go back to saying the 2-player variant for solo is by far the most efficient way to play this, because of the fact you're not managing 4 full character loadouts, just 2. Knowing full well that you can kind of swap in between each character as you so wish, as long as you're focusing your upgrades on disciplines that you're not currently playing as well as the ones you're currently playing. So when you hit those scenarios where it calls for specific disciplines, you're ready to go. And you also have items that can be equipped across those different unlocked characters that you've moved through. So again, not a lot of rules. Just wanted to go over those because now that we're kind of outside of a scenario, this is a perfect time to do so. We'll also talk really quickly about the end conditions of the last scenario here. So at the very end of the last scenario, we got through that particular scenario with 4 rounds kind of booked in. So we definitely came in under the requirement, which I believe was 8 or less. So we were way, way, way below that. So we're going to gain 12 points from that. And then we also took down 7 cavesicles, 2 groups of 2 at the beginning, and then a group of 2 and a group of 1 at the end. So that's 7. And for every cavesicle, we were supposed to get 2 points. So that's 14 points plus the 12 points. 26 points is what we can record for this first scenario. And then of course we have all the gold we accumulated, but remember we have to half that, and we'll keep track of gold as we go along. It won't be really important, as I mentioned, until we get to the very end of the trials. Now, as you guys may remember from the last scenario, we actually picked up an item with Remy. We got the defensive core, and this is actually going to go back to you guys. I want to know whether or not we should equip, going into the second scenario, the defensive core, which gives a +1 to defense, very similar to the ability core that gives a +1 to defense, but this one gives us +2 to health and allows us to exhaust to dodge, whereas this ability core allows us to exhaust to counter. Now, it's a tough call what to do there, because yes, we're getting the benefit of extra health. We will be losing the ability to counter. I can only have one of these equipped. The other one can go into my pack, which is a maximum of 5, and I can swap that in and out as I choose later on. We have the occult shirt, though, that also has an ability, and the reason I mention this now is because depending on which of the 2 cores we choose, it really is worth it to look at other items you have that do similar things. A cult shirt allows me to exhaust to dodge as well, and if the attack deals no damage, unexhaust this card to counter. So in this scenario, or particular card loadout, what it's essentially saying is no damage has to be done in order for the counter to happen, whereas with the ability core, if I have it equipped, at any point in time I can exhaust this to counter. So the question really becomes, is this more useful for me without gaining the extra health? Should I leave it as is, or should I take this ability here to get the extra health and the fact that I can exhaust to just dodge? Either way, if I do this one, I'd have the ability to dodge twice because I'd have the occult shirt and I'd also have the defensive core, which would be pretty handy in situations where Remy's under heavy attack. So I'm going to leave that to you guys in the comments below. Let me know which core do you think is more worth having attached to Remy. The other one will go in Remy's pack. Now, you guys probably remember this from the end of the last video. We talked about the win condition and what it was. If we go ahead and reveal that again, it says right here, restore adventurers. And then we're going to continue to the wrong way on page 8. So we're going to go ahead and talk about restoring our adventurers quickly, and then we're going to move into the narrative of the wrong way. All right, so how do we restore our adventurers? Well, it's actually quite easy. There's 3 simple steps. First, you remove all damage tokens. So from both characters, Rook and Remy, any damage tokens that apply are going to be removed. So that's a quick, simple adjustment. Second, you're going to unexhaust and unflip all cards. So any cards that are flipped over, flip them back upright again. Any exhausted cards are unexhausted. Easy. Next thing you're going to do is remove all effect and ability tokens from your particular character. So if you have any abilities attached, if you have any effects like poison, for instance, they're all washed away at this point. And so currently, both of our characters now are completely reset. And at this particular time, we're fully restored. And now we can move into the narrative of the wrong way.
Rook knocked on the thick stone slab with the butt of his weapon. The sound echoed like a massive stone drum. No way we're getting through that. Nightingale glared at the obstruction, kicking weakly at it. Damn it! Did we take a wrong turn? She glanced over her shoulder to where Zeke and Remy watched. Seems that way. Rook lowered his weapon. Remember, this whole thing is coordinated. Hundreds of candidates are going through the same test. The monsters aren't wild. They have to release them for us in each area, or we'll have nothing to fight. The twists and turns are just another part of the mast. It looks like they can seal up passages with these big stone panels. Zeke dug around in one of his pockets, coming up with a cigarette. Translation: we're too awesome for this test. They want us to slow down so they can spend time on the teams that suck. Looks like it. Rook grinned as he gestured back down the way they came. I think I saw a good place to camp back there. At least we aren't sucking, Remy offered, shrugging one of her wings. I'd rather be in the group they have to slow down than the one that fails. This looks like a good spot. Remy tried to sound enthusiastic. The cavern they had chosen to spend the night in had a ceiling at least 20 feet up. Damp stalactites glittered in the light of their glowstones, occasionally dripping water. Even so, most of the floor was dry and flat enough to serve their needs. I like it. Rook gestured ahead with one meaty hand. Only one other way out. Should be easy to keep watch. We don't have to stop. Nightingale hurried past Remy into the cavern. Wouldn't it be sweet if we were the first team ever to finish the mast in just one day? Yeah. Zeke stopped right in the middle of the cave, sloughing off his heavy pack. It dropped with a dull thud at his feet. But we won't. If we try to keep going without resting, he shook his head. Better to finish a little slow and keep all our limbs. Remy needed no further encouragement to drop her pack, tossing it to the ground. She closed her eyes, letting her massive wings stretch and flex. It felt fantastic. At least until she felt them smack something. Ow! Zeke yelped. Sorry, Remy blushed, retreating a little. I didn't mean to. Nah, it's nothing, Zeke shrugged, wiping a feather off his cheek. It's better than being slapped by Knight's Tale. I haven't done that in ages. Nightingale frowned at him. He returned her scowl with a wide grin and she turned away, looking around. Guess I'll start the fire. I can help. Rook set his bag down at his feet, fishing around for a few seconds before pulling out a set of flint and steel. I'd like to do it, Nightingale said with excitement as she took the tools from Rook. The mast is supposed to prepare us for whatever Middara can throw at us. That means no shortcuts. Rook then pulled out another set of tools, some sticks and tinder. No shortcuts? He asked wryly, holding the objects out towards her. Nightingale sighed. Flint and steel counts as a shortcut, huh? Rook only smiled back. Okay, fine, she said, swapping what she had with Rook. Then she got to work getting the fire started. Remy frowned, thinking desperately of what she could do. The other members of the team all seemed to know each other already, but they barely knew her name. She was determined to pull her own weight through the rest of the mast. I could set up the sleeping bags. Remy looked down at their little pile of supplies. Sure. Zeke was the last to separate, weapon in hand. I'll scout the rest of the cave just in case.
All right, so Zeke has a weapon in hand. He's ready to explore the rest of the cave. We have to make a perception check to see whether or not he's capable of finding something, hopefully something good and not something bad. We're going to roll for a skill check, which is always 2 purple dice to roll, and we're only focused on the numerical values on those dice being added together and then being added to whatever perception value he has on his character card, which in this case is 6. This again is a perfect example of using a character that's currently not a character we're actually using physically in the scenario at the time. Again, it's unlocked, it's available for us to use. We could use Zeke if we wanted to, but as the 2-player variant specifies, if a character check happens, you still grab the character card itself, check the skill value, make the check anyway. So you're not stopping those checks from happening or choosing a different character to make the check. You're still going to follow along because, again, you've got to be tied to the narrative. That's the whole purpose of this journey through Middara. So we're going to go ahead here and we're going to roll these 2 purple dice, cross our fingers, and hope that we get enough. Now, we already have a 6 going into this and we need a 10 to pass. So we got a pretty good chance, but I've seen things fall apart before, so here's hoping things work out for us. Okay, that's a 10. We got a 10 on the dice by itself. We didn't even need the perception that was already there as a bonus from the get-go. So we are now going to continue to check out the loot.
Zeke walked the perimeter of the cave, scraping along the rock with a wooden pole he'd taken from their camping supplies. Where the gloom concealed, he used the pole to check for danger. There was no way to guess what the proctors might try to throw at them. Giant rats set loose into the camp while they slept, pipes to flood the cave. Whatever the Alinea Institute had planned for them, Zeke intended to be ready. He didn't find any secret passages, hidden traps, or insidious ways to torment them in their sleep. As he neared the end of the search, he struck a section of rough wall that thumped strangely when he just hit it right. Hey guys, I think there's something here, he called back before dropping onto his knees and feeling around the wall. After a few seconds, he felt a little lever give way under his touch. Zeke flinched, half expecting a trap, but instead a thin facade retracted from the wall, revealing a tightly wrapped bundle. He kicked gingerly at it, sending it rolling out of the opening and onto the floor in front of him without exploding, shooting acid or sending spikes at him through the floor. He grinned, lifting the tightly wrapped bundle of burlap and holding it up for the rest of his team to see. Hey everybody, I found a care package. Nice work, Rook called, not rising from his work around their makeshift fire pit. They must have hidden some supplies like this for the groups who actually pay attention.
So thanks to Zeke's amazing perception check, we were able to gain 4 random mundane consumable cards. These 4 cards we'll draw in just a second, as I want to talk to you guys about the differences between equipped items, which we already are very familiar about, which is basically everything you're bringing into or on a character when you bring them into a scenario, which is what you've seen through scenario number 1. And then additionally, the adventurers have a pack, which is normally size 3. As I mentioned, the 2-player variant moves it up to 5. The next thing to be aware of is there is such a thing as the party stash, and it represents all the items that the party owns but doesn't currently want to equip. The party stash never runs out of room, and players may keep as many items in the party stash as they would like. Items in the party stash can only be accessed during story rounds, so this is really important. So you're able to go ahead and pack away a bunch of other items if you so choose, but again, you can only access those items that are in the party stash when a story round comes around, and those are less frequent than how many scenarios you'll be playing. So with all that knowledge now, we can take a look and see that Remy currently has the juice box, a smoke bomb, and throwing knives. Another thing to note is when you have items equipped, the most you can have consumable wise is 3. So Remy currently is maxed out for how many consumables Remy can hold, whereas Rook only has the energy potion, so 1. So we'll be able to put 2 of them onto Rook. Remember, playing the 2-player variant, we can mix and match right now, which is great. And then we can put the rest in our character's pack as well. So we're going to go ahead and draw these 4. I'm going to do this by not looking at the cards and putting them underneath the table here, and then doing a random draw because you can see what the item is from the back of the card. So I prefer to do this blindly so that we have no idea what we're going to get. So a couple shuffles, and we'll pull it out, pull the top 4 right from the beginning. So we got the juice box, we got another juice box, we got ourselves a plank. I have no idea what that's going to do. These are all discardable cards so far because they are consumables. And magic bomb. Nice. That's really good. Always good to have that, especially when we're going up against characters with poison, because that poison, as you guys remember, was pretty nasty. So the question I have for you guys is, out of all these items, we need to decide which ones land on which characters. So first off, we have 2 of the juice boxes. Basically, you discard it, and you or an adjacent ally can heal 3. The other one down below here is the plank, and it says, discard it, you may do one of the following. Either deal a purple damage of purple die worth of physical damage to an adjacent opponent, or place the plank token on an adjacent space. That's really cool. So this could actually help you walk across one of those giant caverns, for instance. That's actually really cool. Or you could reduce physical damage dealt to you by 2. Very useful. Seems like something we probably should have equipped. The other thing is Magic Bomb. Discard, remove an effect from allies within SOI. Again, very handy. Honestly, these are the 2 most important ones I think we should do. My suggestion would be to put these 2 on Rook and put the 2 juice boxes into the party stash into the characters' packs. Maybe 1 each. Because currently a smoke bomb, the juice box, and throwing knives on Remy is already great. And then if we put the plank and the bomb and like the magic bomb and the HP potion on Rook, we're looking pretty good in terms of very different items equipped going into the second scenario. But I'll let you guys in the comments below let me know what you think we should do item-wise.
Remy worked diligently, not bothering to keep her wings folded behind her as she laid out the sleeping mats and put the bedrolls atop them. The others were all relaxing now after their intense day, but Remy hadn't complained. She would show them how useful she could be. Without the shelter of a tent, Remy laid tripwires across each entrance. She didn't think the Institute would plan an attack in the middle of the night, but she wasn't going to rule it out. Rook's voice rumbled from the fire circle. "That's right. Not too much," he said on a large rock, watching Nightingale. She puffed on a ball of smoldering kindling, and soon the fistful of plant fiber started to smoke. "Get it into the rest of the wood, quick!" She did, and soon the little fire roared to life. "That wasn't that hard." Nightingale wiped her hands against her shirt. "Is roughing it always this easy?" "Easy? It took you 20 minutes to light the fire," Zeke said. Since returning from the scouting excursion, he'd watched as Nightingale and Rook struggled to get the fire lit. Nightingale only shrugged and grinned at him. Another 20 minutes later, and they were all gathered around the fire, resting on a ring of rubble they'd made and sharing bowls of camp stew. Remy felt much better with hot food in her stomach and a merry fire crackling nearby. Nightingale smiled appreciatively. "This is great stuff, Remy. I never thought camp food could taste this good." Remy looked away, though she couldn't keep the pride from her face. "I used to cook for my little brothers and sisters all the time. Half the time we had less in the cupboards than the academy gave us to work with here." Nightingale looked up, understanding in her eyes. "My family back on Earth didn't have a lot either. And now we're in Middara." Zeke's voice was more subdued as he sipped the broth from his bowl. "What we had on Earth isn't what we have here. Another few days and we'll be citizens. We'll be able to leave the academy whenever we want, buy anything we want, choose where to work." "Maybe your mom will," Nightingale muttered. "But Balthazar and Kezia? It feels like I'm just a tool to my parents here. Being royalty just makes me and you nothing more than pawns." "You're a princess, though," Remy said, meeting her gaze. "Isn't that exciting?" Nightingale scoffed. "If you like being cooped up for the rest of your life, being whisked away to a fantasy world should be about this." She gestured at the dark cave around her. "Adventure, danger, monsters and traps. Now that's exciting." Remy frowned and took another sip from her bowl. Nightingale patted Remy on the back. "Don't sweat it, Rimdog. I thought being a princess would be much cooler, too." "Rimdog?" Remy grimaced at the moniker. She hoped that it wasn't something Nightingale was going to keep calling her. Zeke shifted on his log. "I don't know. It's better than being poor." His eyes flickered towards Rook. No offense. Rook waved his hand dismissively and kept eating his stew. But my mom, or should I say Lady Ida Zhang, he spoke her title mockingly, get past all her bullshit formality and politics, and I think somewhere in there is a heart. I bet your parents are the same, Knight. I doubt that. I'll be lucky if this isn't the last time I'm in any kind of danger, Nightingale said. It's not like it's unique to royalty, Rook replied thoughtfully. My parents here on Middara are just farmers. They're great, but I don't think farming is for me. I'd rather do something a bit more exciting, too. Nightingale made a grunt in agreement, and there was a long pause. Remy looked up and found all three of them looking at her, and she shuffled uncomfortably under the weight of their stares. What about you, Remy? Nightingale finally asked. I've heard Zeke complain about his mom 1,000 times, but I've never really talked to you. Remy hesitated, but took a breath. Well, all I have here is my father, and he's... She looked away. I'm not really sure what kind of person he is. Nightingale raised an eyebrow, but Remy didn't continue. She didn't want them to think less of her. Rook saved her from having to elaborate. We should rest. He set the pot down beside the fire, completely empty. We'll need our strength for tomorrow. Remy slept uneasily in the dark cave, tossing and turning on the uneven stone. The school hadn't given them tents, and the sleeping bags they'd been given were threadbare and offered little insulation. From the occasional shifting or grunt she heard in the dark, Remy was fairly sure her new friends were all equally uncomfortable. The next morning, Rook woke her with a gentle nudge and the smell of hot oatmeal. A quick breakfast and a little time to clean up their camp, and they started moving again. I've got a great feeling about today, Nightingale called from the front of the group. She sounded far more awake than Remy felt. So maybe we didn't finish early. That doesn't mean we can't totally own it. I'm sure we will. Zeke walked along beside Nightingale. This left Remy at the rear with Rook, though the corridor was only just wide enough for them to walk abreast. At least the way was mostly straight. She supposed far fewer students would make it through the Mast if they were constantly getting lost. They didn't have far to go before the path widened, running along the edge of a dank pond. Remy reached out with one boot, touching the side. Water splashed and ripples echoed across the dark surface. They weren't alone.
A group of cave sickles waits for us in the top left-hand corner of the game board. 1, 2, 3, all part of the same group. And in the far northeast corner of the game board, we have a Gevudan, which is just waiting for us on the opposite side of a pond. Our heroes enter scenario number 2, and our positions for entry can be the 2 they currently sit in or the 2 currently behind them. Again, I'll go back to you guys if you'd like to see them move positions further back, but I thought they were a little aggressive and wanted to be at the front of the line on the starting positions. So we've got them set up right here. We've got all of the enemies in play. When we move into the first part of this second scenario, we'll talk more about this new enemy we've never seen before, as we're very familiar with the cave sickles from the last one. Now let's talk about the end conditions, loot, special encounter rules, and some tips. So first off, the end conditions say the win condition is that all the opponents are defeated. So every opponent I just specified there are defeated, as well as any surprise ones that happen to arrive, if any. And then we have a lose condition here. If all adventurers are defeated, we lose. And you can see that they're going to take us in 2 different paths of the narrative, either way. Our level's mundane again, so all of our loot levels will be considered mundane. And there is no loot in this particular scenario anyway, so we won't be drawing any cards that we can actually grab from. However, if we do go ahead and we take down the cave sickle, we can still, as a group, gain a combatant loot card from that, but there's no actual loot tokens within the scenario. Special encounter rules say grading. Again, we're currently in a trial or a test, continuing that, so this encounter of the Mast will grade you on your combat performance, record the score you earned during this encounter in the notes section on the adventure sheet. Your score for each encounter can never fall below 0. So again, it's a grading exercise in how much we can actually take things down. So cave sickles defeated, we get 2 points for each one now in this particular scenario, and then if the Gevudan is defeated, it's 5 points. If we lose any adventurers along the way, -5 points. Lastly here, there's a tip about flanking and terrain. So proper positioning is everything, and figures may never dodge while in water. So this is something to remember. Use this to your advantage when fighting an opponent who dodges a lot. Be careful though, this restriction also applies to you. If you are having a hard time hitting an opponent, don't forget to flank. And there's a whole section of the rulebook as it specifies about flanking, but essentially flanking is being on the total opposite side of the opponent from another friendly character. So in this case, I could have Remy and Rook surrounding, not beside each other, but basically on opposite ends of each other, and that would be considered a flanking maneuver, giving us a bonus when we attack. We'll talk more about it if we actually can set that up during the gameplay, if we get lucky enough to get in those positions. But again, that is going to be the setup. Again, this is another underground adventure. It's considered the Mast day number 2, and in the next episode, we're going to be diving in to the playthrough. And that's going to wrap up moving into scenario number 2 of the Mast on day 2. Thanks again for watching, everyone. And as always, keep on rolling solo.